Here we go. So ISO 9000, 9001, and I threw in 9002 on here because that's just kind of kicking off and starting. Um, and so some of these changes in publications, 9000 will be in 2025, 9001 will be in 2026, and 9002 will likely be in early 2027. So kind of what's coming in the next few years as we come down the road. I will cover, some of these dates in more detail as we go along. All right. So 9,000. 9,000 to me gets a little bit of a bad rap, and a lot of people like to ignore it. Most people just think about it as the definitions document. And while, yes, that's true, the definitions are in section 3, clause 3 and 3.1 and so forth and so on. To me, the more important section of ISO 9000 is section 2, where it starts off with some fundamental concepts in its current organization, and then the quality management principles. And then there's actually an entire section on developing the QMS. So developing your quality management system is outlined in this granddaddy of standards, this 9000. Now, you guys asked if there were some automotive people in here, some other areas that might be concerned, whether you got AS 9100 or other pieces. So developing the QMS really applies to all of these standards. When it comes down to it, the sector-specific quality management systems, as it does informs the foundation of 9001. So in order to understand where the requirements come from, you really need to go back to section 2 in ISO 9000, and as it grows in these, and outlines the concepts and the principles that are necessary for a quality management system. Okay, and so the current organization, and this did change in the 2015 edition. It went from 6 to 5. And so we outline what quality is, a quality management system, and these fundamental concepts, the context of the organization, interested parties, and support. And that was it as far as fundamentals go in the 2015 edition. Okay. And then there's the 7 management principles. Again, these went from 8 to 7 in the 2015 edition. So you can understand the principles, and most of us talk about customer satisfaction. The actual principle is customer focus. We talk about leadership, engagement of people, the process approach, what improvement means, evidence-based decision-making, and then relationship management. And so those 7 quality management principles, again, form the foundation of your quality management system. Okay. Now, developing the QMS has these kind of basic parts of it. It talks about the QMS model, what a model quality management system looks like and how it's put together. The development of the quality management system and its processes, and then how standards and excellence models come into play. And much of this is dedicated to the 10,000 level of standards. And if you're familiar with that, it covers everything from documentation to continual improvement and so forth and so on. Okay. And that's what is in that section 2.3 of the 9000 standard. Okay. This is all what I just outlined is the current 2015 edition. Okay. So if you're looking at this and you feel like you've missed out on something, I've got even a bigger surprise for you as we come forward to the next edition. Okay. And so let's talk about what's coming with the changes to 9000. Now, those 7 fundamentals, those principles. So we went back here, right? These 7 quality management principles, they aren't really changing much. We felt that those 7 principles really outline what the fundamental and the principles are of a quality management system, and they're still true today. Now, there's a little bit of tweaking and updating as we talk about different tools, including AI and machine learning, circular economy, and some of the rest of these pieces. But the quality management principles pretty much have stayed the same. And so this section in 2.1 really stays pretty close to what 2015 has been. On the other side of that, these fundamental concepts, we went from those 5 that we had, and again, I'm going to show those, don't get dizzy. These 5 fundamental concepts that we had: quality, quality management system, context of an organization, interested parties, and support. And that has now grown to 22 concepts. Okay. And it's the fundamental concepts of a quality management system, as well as the supporting concepts for management systems. Okay. And so you now see all of these things in these fundamental concepts. Things like risk-based thinking that wasn't outlined in ISO 9000, right? There was some basic stuff in 9001, but now 9000 is better explaining that concepts and that fundamental concept. The customer experience. And again, some people will try to default this back to customer satisfaction, but not all of it is about satisfaction, because you talk about government principles. Lots of times when in police organizations can be certified to 9001, most of the time, or many times, you're not going to be very satisfied truly with that interface, but you still want to have a good customer experience, right? As good as you can have it, right? We know that many times government and other organizations are, connecting with people at some of the lowest points in their lives. And so we want to talk about that customer experience and how do we have a positive customer experience. Okay. People aspects and managing people and people's expectations is a big part of having a good quality management system. Then relationship management, it's not just external relationships, but internal relationships and relationships with suppliers, external providers, outsourcing, that type of thing, and understanding how to manage relationships and that concept. Okay. Demographic changes. As demographics change, and you want to serve a different demographic, poor people, old people, young people, technology savvy people, those types of things, those demographics, and understanding how those demographics change. Well, that's a principle that applies to your quality management. Okay. Change management. It's always managing change and understanding that. Integration. And some of this is really talking about integrated management systems as well. So integrating quality management with environmental management, information security management, and all of these other pieces that need to be integrated and brought in together as part of your business. Many people, and to me, the more advanced people understand that a quality management system has to integrate with your business. It can't be, in the way. It can't slow things down. It has to streamline alongside the rest of your business in order to be truly effective. Okay. And integrating that into the thinking and having that quality culture. Okay. Agility, meaning to be able to, the ability to move quickly and swiftly and without making mistakes and being agile. Okay. Knowledge management. This is a concept that was brought in the 2015 edition, kind of some of 9001. Some of the pieces of understanding that, your organization has a know-how, a knowledge that has to be maintained. And how do you manage that? Okay. Then we go through innovation. How do you move things forward? Information and social media. understanding how to interface that and how that affects your quality management system and maybe customer feedback, complaint handling, those types of things. The information that gets put on a website, all is affected by your quality management system processes and integrating that. A big concept that's coming forward is the circular economy. This is a concept that will be brought also into ISO 9001. A circular economy is how does the output of your processes feed in the input of another company or another part of your organization or those types of things, so that you're not creating excessive waste. And how does it how do those byproducts and products and byproducts move through the economy to be reused and recycled as part of the next processes, and understanding how your organization fits in the rest of the economy. Okay. Emerging technologies. We talked about this a bit and talk about, I mean, obviously a big piece that is coming forward is AI and machine learning. And then I'll mention at this point, again, for you people that are ASQ members, and I think even non-members can access it. If you go to My ASQ or asq.org, you'll run into an icon, looks like an owl. It's something called Quincy. Quincy is ASQ's AI tool. And so you can use Quincy to look up concepts within quality, and these types of things. So please, when you get a chance, go to, again, MyASQ or asq.org and look for Quincy and make some use of that. Okay. Ethics and ethical behavior. Actually, ethics itself was one of the things that I helped drive out of the standard. But ethical behavior and encouraging ethical behavior will remain. One of the things, and the reason this concept is coming forward is that people understand that unless you have and encourage ethical behavior, in other words, doing the right thing, that having a quality management system may not matter. And so they want to, part of that quality management system in its all-encompassing way is to ensure that you have encourage and have ethical behavior within your organization. Okay. Then we can talk about organizational culture, what it means to have a culture of quality, and how do you affect the organizational culture. Again, these concepts and these fundamental concepts coming forth help to form the foundation of quality management. Okay. One thing, I'll correct these before we send them out. I just noticed on the top it says CD ISO 9000. ISO 9000 is actually currently in the DIS stage. Okay. And DIS commenting just ended on July 2nd. And so the comments are being collated, and we'll be addressing those over the next it'll be addressed over the next couple months. Okay. Some of the other changes that are happening in clause 3. So TC 176, and again, this is in working group 2. They went back and said, you know what? We're not just a standard for 9001 users. We're a standard for all TC 176 users. So the 10,000 series of standards, there's a new 17,000 series of standards, which is government management systems, and those types of things. All are brought into ISO 9000, and so you'll see there's a lot of actually an entire section of new definitions. These are really not changes per se, but rather bringing all of those terms and definitions in the TC 176 family of standards to be in ISO 9000. Okay. And so all of those 10,000 level document terms, government quality system terms, and the rest of things in TC 176. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of a look at it, and we'll talk about it again when we talk about 9001. So the high level structure, and this is ISO's structure for all management system standards. The high level structure has 20, I believe it's 23 terms that are in that structure and have to be used without changes. The reason is because they do want those terms to be common across all management systems, right? So 14,001, 27,001, all those other management system standards use the same those same definitions for those 23 terms. Okay, so those 23 terms are being brought exactly as they are into ISO 9000. Okay, and so that does change them just a little bit, not significantly. Okay. All right. We'll talk about schedule a little bit, and then we'll move on to 9001 stuff. So ISO 9000 is currently in the DIS stage. This means it's a draft industry standard. It is available for purchase, so you can go out there and buy it. Okay. And like I said, the commenting period was just completed on July 2nd. Okay. The next meeting of Working Group 2 is scheduled for a couple weeks from now on the week of July 21st in Porto, Portugal. And so I'll be headed off to that in a couple weeks here with my 5 pages of comments and working with the rest of the working group members to resolve those comments. Okay. Once those things are resolved to the satisfaction of the working group, then it would move forward to the FDIS stage, which is the final draft industry standard before publication. Okay. Once it's moved forward to FDIS, and this gets balloted at the technical committee level, once it moves forward, no technical changes may be made. Only editorial changes can be made at that point. So these are the last group of technical changes that can be made to the standard as we come up to that week in Porto. It does typically, I mean, we have 4 days scheduled, and we hope that we get through the comments on the DIS in those 4 days. If we don't get through it, then we'll follow up with some usually virtual meetings. We'll follow that in order to get final resolution on the comments so that it can move forward. We do expect the ISO 9000 will be published sometime September, October, maybe November, but sometime in the fourth quarter of 2025. That's this year yet. Okay. I'm gonna take a breath and pause there for a second to let people ask questions about ISO 9000 and its revision. Anybody?
Hi, this is Lisa.
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you for the information. I'm a bit behind on the standards. 9000 includes the 9001, 2, and 3 as well?
Nope.
No, so this is just for 9000 then you're
This
talking.
is just ISO 9000. And it's really is the granddaddy, sets the foundation for quality management systems.
So are the other parts updating as well then?
Yep. So we'll talk about 9001 next, and I'll touch a little bit on 9002 and some other work that's going on within the TC 176 family.
Do you think that that date in late 2025 is going to hold?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, have fun in Portugal. I heard that Porto is really nice. I heard it's really nice.
I actually have been to Porto before, so if everybody knows, it's the home of port wine. So that's where there's a couple of distilleries there. So
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Thank you.
yeah, good to see you, Lisa. All right. Come on, there's got to be some other questions about ISO 9000 out there.
Are you in the committee of 9001 too? Because things carry over from one to the other, right, Mark?
Yep.
Okay.
So this is ISO 9000 is TC 176 SC1 Working Group 2. Okay, and 9001 is TC 176 SC2 Subcommittee 2 Working Group 29, and I'm part of both of those working groups. Okay. I was that clear on all of these changes, or it's just kind of circling in people's heads and go, whoa.
Does 9000 have to be released before 9001 gets released?
So the 2015 edition, they were released concurrently together, and the last two revisions of both these standards have been released together. In this case, ISO 9000 will be about a year ahead of 9001. That was because 9001 got delayed due to some of the late changes that were made on the first committee draft, and so they had to back up a bit and do a second committee draft, and so 9001 has fallen behind the revision of 9000, which to me is just fine. I mean, having the concepts and the definitions and all of that stuff out there first, I think it sets a better foundation again for 9001.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Yep.
Mike, often they say ISO 9001 is the GMP standard, but I guess it's a combination of 9000 and 9001, isn't it?
Yeah, again, ISO 9000 sets the foundation. It is the fundamentals and principles of quality management. 9001 is a requirement standard, right? It's requirements for quality management systems. That's the difference.
Okay.
Right? So 9000 is kind of more of a conceptual concepts and fundamental principles, along with some terms and definitions. And 9001, again, establishes requirements for a quality management system. Okay.
So when people say we follow ISO 9001, they're definitely depending on the grandfather 9000.
Yeah. I mean, 9000 is a normative reference in 9001, which means all of the things that are in 9000 are required in 9001.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and many people again skip over because they don't want to spend the money on buying another standard, right? I would say that 9000 is as important as 9001. Especially if you're doing integrated management systems, especially if you're in other industries like med device. 1345 is also has a normative reference to ISO 9000, 2015, right? If you're AS 9100, if you're IATF, all of these things depend on ISO 9000 as the foundation, fundamentals, and principles. Okay. All right. Any other questions on 9000 before we move on? All right. Maybe you're all more interested in 9001. Could be. So 9001. Again, it's currently, the last publication was in 2015. And it moved from, if you remember, in 1340, people med device 1345 has still got clauses 0 through 8. So the 2008 edition of 9001 was in 0 through 8. In 2015, it went to the 10 clause structure that it's currently in, that goes according to what's called Annex SL, which is, you can either call it the high level structure or the harmonized approach. The harmonized approach to management system standards is in that structure. And the idea here was that so that you can integrate quality management system and environmental management and information management and all the other management systems because they have the identical clause structure, that 10 clause structure. Okay, and so that's the idea of Annex SL and the harmonized approach. Okay, in 2015, all of the definitions were moved out of ISO 9000 and out of 9001 into ISO 9000. So if you look at the 2015 edition of ISO 9001, there are no definitions. Clause 3 is blank, right? It gives a reference to ISO 9000 for all those definitions. Okay. In 2015, we also introduced the formal introduction of risk-based thinking that was integrated in with the process approach. Okay. And this was really meant to introduce a level of flexibility. In med device, we call it risk-based approach. 9001 calls it risk-based thinking. The concept here is that you need to understand those requirements in the context of your organization and the risks to your organization, and make sure that you right size it to your organization. That large companies and corporations would have a different approach because of the potential risks than smaller companies. And what I mean by that is, if you have a mom and pop 2-person organization, do you really need a quality manual? Do you really need an explanation of what the management system looks like? I mean, you're working together with it every single day. Everybody in the organization is working on it. Okay. However, when you have a 40,000 person organization and different parts of the organization do different things, and so not everybody is familiar with the manufacturing operations, not everybody is familiar with, complaint handling, all of those types of things, you need more explanation of processes. You have to split it down into work instructions and, split it down to what the tasks are that an individual would do. And because of that, then you're going to need that quality manual to explain the organization, how the processes interact, and all of those types of things. I'm trying to use the two extremes so you can understand that risk-based thinking was really meant to allow people to customize the system and processes to their organization, understanding the risk. Okay, it's no longer an arbitrary approach, but understanding what the risks are that you're trying to mitigate by having those quality management system processes in place. Okay. In addition, the 2015 edition really took an operational focus. And so that whole clause 8 is now called operations. If you remember, much of the content came from clause 7, which was really product realization. In med device terms, we call it design control. And so it was really design and engineering focused in the 2015 edition. And this brought it to a much more operational focus. Okay. And really some of the focus on services in addition to just products, and working in service organizations, right? So that's all of the current stuff, right? That's what the 2015 edition did for us, and continues to do. Okay. So then we can start talking about the changes. Okay. So Annex SL, that harmonized approach, has had, I think, 3 revisions to it. And so we're updating to the current revision of that high-level structure, the harmonized approach. One of the things that was really brought in with this harmonized approach, I guess, is 20 definitions. So those 20 definitions have to come in without change. Any change to that high-level structure is what's called a deviation. Now, us in med device and some other industries do not like the word deviation. And so there is definitely a push to avoid deviations, trying to keep the harmonized approach, that high-level structure, as close to what it is in Annex SL as possible. Again, this facilitates alignment between management system standards. Okay, and we do keep that those 10 sections. But what I'm trying to highlight here is actually section 10 itself, the last section on improvement, does a little bit of reorganization. And it used to begin with 10.1 was a general section. And I think 10.2 was continual improvement, and 10.3 is corrective action. So there's only 2 sections, I believe, in it now. So 10.1, and the attempt here was to bring continual improvement to the forefront. And so continual improvement is now section 10.1. And corrective action is after that. Okay, and 10.2 and so forth. Right, so section 10 has some reorganization. There's really not any direct intent to change the content. It's just a reorganization. Okay. And then what's really being brought in the changes is updates that were taken as part of the user survey. And so users did have a direct input here. The technology changes, the circular economy, the concept of customer experience, those things that we just talked about in some of the changes in ISO 9000 will also be reflected in 9001. Okay. Moving forward here, the next kind of concept, or I'll say big change, is the separation of the actions to address risks and opportunities. So in the high-level structure in the previous edition, you talked about risks and opportunities, and it made it seem like risk and opportunity were 2 sides of a coin. You had risks to avoid and opportunities to take, and that is simply not true. Okay, there are risks that you have to mitigate and avoid, and there are some opportunities in mitigating and avoiding those risks. And then there's opportunities for you to be able to take advantage of, and there's risks to taking those opportunities, right? And so they're not 2 sides of a coin, but there's rather some risks that you need to avoid and opportunities that you need to take advantage of. And each of those have risks and opportunities associated with them. And so it gets to be a little bit of a complicated conversation, but the thing to focus on here is the actions that you're taking. Okay, you're taking some actions to avoid risks, you're taking some actions to take opportunities, and you need to make sure that you incorporate risk-based thinking as you look at those actions. Okay, this is and I think you asked about some questions about auditing and those types of things. This concept may take some time to understand. And that's why, again, I'm going to refer you back to ISO 9000, because that concept of risk-based thinking and risks and opportunities will come through, I think, better as you look at ISO 9000 in preparation for the changes coming in 9001. All right. This concept of documented information, as many of you know, the 2015 edition went away from the terms documents and records that 1345 still has, and I'm not sure about 9000 or AS 9100 and those types, but this terminology of documented information made some waves, and sometimes people misunderstand it. Documented information and what used to be called documents are available as documented information, right? So when you say it's available, it means that it's something you're going to use to do some activity, right? So it's a work instruction that's documented information that's available as documented information, right? So it's something that you're going to use. right? As opposed to a record, and that's documented information that's available as evidence of conformity to a requirement, right? So available as evidence is things that are used to prove that you followed the rules, that you followed your processes. Okay. And that's, you can see that as an auditor when it's audit evidence, right? It's the documented information available as audit evidence. Okay. Those types of things. Now, again, they're both documented information. They both obviously have the word available in. One piece is evidence, the records that show that you did what you said you were going to do, right? As opposed to the available as showing what you need to do. Okay? So that's where you're going to see a little bit of change. I don't even remember what the old words were now because I've been using this for a little while. But those are the things that you're going to look for from an auditor's perspective, that type of thing. All right. All right. Moving on to Appendix A. So Appendix A to ISO 9001 will be an appendix of clarification. And I'll come back to 9002 in a second, but I'm going to juxtapose it against 9002 for a second. So 9002 is a guidance document for implementation, showing you how to meet the requirements, right? Appendix A is meant to be a clarification of what the requirements are. Now, many times, and there still are some notes in the text, but this was often used notes within the text, right? It should say note, for to meet this requirement, it would include, whatever, those types of things. And so there was a user feedback that said they didn't like all of these notes, that most of them didn't help very much and that kind of stuff, and so forth. And it would be better if you added more words and explanation to help clarify what the requirement are. Well, if you add that all within the text, it would break up the requirements quite substantially. And so the working group decided to move most of those explanations, the clarifications, into Appendix A. And so we're going to have an Appendix A that roughly goes down each of the clauses and provides a clarification of what the requirement is. Again, this is not meant to change the requirements in any way, shape, or form. It's just meant to be a clarification. Now, much of this has come from a group within TC 176 that's called APG, which is the Audit Practices Group. And the Audit Practices Group is trying to eliminate misinterpretation by auditors. And so this is the generation of Appendix A, okay, in the clarification of concepts, and the clarification of the requirement. Okay, so I do see Appendix A as being a useful piece of the standard. Again, it's a informative section, so it means it doesn't have any requirements in it. It simply is meant to clarify the requirement that's in the text of the standard itself. Okay?
Hey, Mark, can you expand on that comment about auditor in misinterpretation? Because I think I understand and agree, and I just wonder if you could expand a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many organizations that I've run into where, I'm telling them, well, that's not what it means. And they'll say, well, my auditor said this is what it means. And they wrote me a non-conformance on that. I'll give you an example. Somebody said, their auditor expected that people memorize the quality policy. I'm like, Okay, that's not in the standard anywhere. You have to have awareness of the quality policy, which means, yeah, I know it's posted over there on the wall. I don't have to memorize it. It's posted on the wall, right? Or it's posted in the break room, or it's it's in the quality manual. It's that awareness it's a requirement, right? And so this will provide some of that clarification that it's not necessary to memorize a quality policy, right? Does that help, Lisa?
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I understand that, and I've audited long enough to know that a lot of auditors get a bad rap sometimes for just that kind of thing. Like, that's not what it really means, and it's up for interpretation. And then auditors are left holding the bag on, auditor every year is different, and then people say different things, and this quality system becomes like a Frankenstein because of those things.
Exactly. And I've seen quality management systems that they added this piece into work instruction and that piece into work instruction or SOP, and all of a sudden now they have, an SOP that should have been 3 pages is now 10 pages because their auditor said that they needed to add this, that, and the everything.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
And so this is again some of the people that come from the audit practices group are trying to provide these clarifications to avoid this misinterpretation.
I always make it a point when I'm on an audit to say to the client that it's not what I think, it's what's in the standard. And I say, and I tell the client, I say, if there's an issue or something comes up, I always refer back to the standard. What exactly does the standard say?
Yep.
Because as auditors, we go into a lot of places. We've had our own quality system, so you don't want to get confused. So I always tell the client, I will refer to the standard. It's not because I don't know the standard, but I want to read exactly what's in the standard and how does that standard
Yeah,
read.
Rich, I'm glad you're saying, because I mean I do auditing occasionally, and when I'm auditing, especially 1345 or 9001, when I'm auditing, I usually have 2 screens and I have it up on the other screen so that I can refer back to it. And I'm like, I literally typed most of 1345. You think I probably know it pretty well, right? But sometimes I, put my own words in there, right? And so you have to go back and read what the standard actually says. There's things that I say to people all the time and they don't believe me. One thing I say in 1345, and same as 9001, training is not a requirement. There is no requirement to do training. Okay, the requirement is to establish the requirements for competence. And if there's a gap to competence, one of the ways to close that gap is by training and experience and on the job and all those other things, right? So there is no requirement within the ISO 9001 or 1345 to train. It's established the necessary competence. Okay, those are those types of things where that's what it actually says. The other one that comes up often, especially in 1345 again, the risk-based approach. People say implement the risk-based approach, and they think that, well, you have to see what the risk is, you have to mitigate it, you have to make sure that it works. No. Read the rest of the requirement. It says the risk-based approach to the controls applied within the quality management system processes. It's only about controls. It's not about assessing risks. It's not about other parts of risk management. It's only about controls you put in place. Okay? And you have to go back and read what the requirement actually is. Okay? Any other questions on that? Again, Appendix A is meant to be that clarification, and Appendix A is not small. There's a lot of content in Appendix A. Okay, and we're hopeful that it's useful. Okay. The things that are for implementation as you put your quality management system in place are moving into 9002. Okay. 9002, when it was published in 2015, was a TS, a technical specification. The next edition will be an international standard. It will be a standard of its own with no requirements, because all the requirements come from 9001, but it's a standard for implementation of 9001. Okay. And I am the secretary for that group. So that's working group 30 within SC2. And so we've just started working on that document. I anticipate that we'll work through, because we're actually skipping the committee draft stage of it though. And so it'll move directly from working draft to DIS. And that'll probably happen at the same time that 9001 gets published, because we can't really move forward a draft of that standard until 9001 is at least in the final FDIS, or really it should be at publication. So around September of next year, 9002 will move into the draft standard, and then get published probably early in 2027. Okay. That's why we had all those dates of 25, 26, and 27 now. All righty.
So Mark, I have a question on that 9002.
Yeah, go ahead.
So now that it's a standard on implementing
9001.
So 9001, how do you
Yeah.
think it'll be used? Like, will it be like a requirement for, let's say, a new company as they, established standard now have to follow this process or this standard?
I think to me, it's more applicable for larger corporations. And I think somebody said when we did the intro, somebody said that they were implementing quality management systems across several sites. So I think 9002 will be useful for those organizations that have to do 9001 over several sites, so that you're all implementing the requirements in the same way, right? So I think that's probably the best use of 9002. But it does help with the implementation, again, how to do it, what processes to have in place, all those kinds of things. Okay, and it will come with examples. So that's, to me, the most useful thing in 9002 is going to be the examples, how to do it.
Okay.
Does that help,
Thanks.
Baz?
Yeah, thanks. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the big things that people said they were interested in, the status and the schedule. So the ballot is just being issued for the DIS. Okay. Part of the process as ISO goes from committee draft to draft standard is they have to go through translation into French as part of the process. And so it's at the translation piece right now. So ISO editors get to massage it and work on it a little bit. It goes through translation, and then it'll come out as publicly available. You'll be able to buy the DIS version. Okay. And then commenting will probably be open on that ballot until sometime in November of this year. Okay. And so what that means is, I would have brought this up on ISO 9000, but it's already closed. But this will just be opening for the DIS. And so your organization can buy the standard. They can submit comments to people like me that are on the working group, or ASQ is actually the US technical group that gets together. So ASQ has a tag, a technical advisory group, that will take into the comments and form the U.S. opinion on those comments and submit those for consideration by the working group from a U.S. perspective. Okay, and so you have some opportunity here to have some impact on the standard by getting that DIS version, by taking a look at it and submitting comments. Okay. And so that'll be open till November of this year, and balloting. And so the way the balloting works is for it to move forward from the CD stage, which is, it's at, in the transition to the DIS stage, at least half of the P members, US being one vote, right? Half of the P members have to vote affirmative, right? To allow it to move forward. When it moves from DIS to FDIS, it has to be at least 2/3 of the members vote in the affirmative. Okay, and for it to move from FDIS to publication, at least 3/4, 75% have to vote affirmative. Okay, and actually it does say no more than 25% in the negative, because there's abstentions and those types of things that kind of throw off some of the numbers sometimes. But it has to be, it's supposed to be 75% affirmative, no more than 25% negative. Okay, or it doesn't move forward to publication. So that's the level of consensus that has to happen for an ISO standard to be published, is at least 3/4 of the countries need to say yes. Okay. So that ballot will be until November. Could be a little bit later, but November would be the target. And the next meeting is tentatively scheduled in Mexico City the week of January 26th, so the end of January. Okay, so that will work on resolving the comments on the DIS. Again, the intent would be to resolve all of those comments. If they can't be all resolved, we'll have remote meetings until they are resolved. And then we'll have an FDIS, that final draft, in early 2026, and publication in the 3rd quarter, because again, it will have to go through translations in there and balloting, and it takes about 3 months to do that stuff. So by the time we get to publication, it's kind of the target right now is September of 2026. Okay.
5 more minutes, Mark.
Yeah, that's right, because I'm on my last slide. Like we timed it, right, Baz?
Yeah, perfect. That was wonderful.
So we're really at the spot for questions. So we have about, like Baz said, we have about 5 minutes left here for you to ask questions. Those types of things. How can I get involved? All that kind of stuff. Anybody?
What will be the implementation time that's published? Phase-in time.
So
typically.
Typically there is a 3-year transition. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's typical, but ISO does not control that. That's controlled by the accreditation bodies. And so IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, is usually the one that sets that. I will tell you that, Rich, in my opinion, there isn't really a lot of significant changes. There's some changes in how things are being ordered. There's some changes in some terminology, adding some information, again, around emerging technologies, circular economy, ethical behavior, all of those types of things. But these are concepts that are not foreign to most companies, right? It's just understanding that there's some requirements now for you to implement, right? But they aren't particularly difficult. There aren't any requirements for ethical behavior, right? It's just to encourage ethical behavior. And so, it's kind of like, anyhow, to me, and maybe some of you guys might have a different opinion, but the big to do about the amendment 1 that was done that brought in the interested parties with regard to climate change, and taking climate change into account. That didn't change the standard. You still, before that amendment was put in there, you had to take into account all the relative, things. Climate change was one of those things, and all they did was make it explicit.
Agreed.
So it didn't change the content of the standard, didn't change any requirements. It just made it explicit because people
Agreed.
were ignoring those types of things. So it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of like, okay, duh, you can't act in a fraudulent way and have a good quality management system, right? So you have to have ethical behavior in order to have a good quality management system. We're just saying some things explicitly to make sure that you understand the connection between ethical behavior and having a good quality management system, in essence, right? It still is the basic things, the basic ISO tenet of say what you're going to do and then show me that you did what you said you were going to do, right? All right. What other questions do you have?
So if it's not a requirement, Mark.
Say that again.
If it's not a requirement, aren't people going to be lost? For example, if it is a requirement, we tell them to, because ISO doesn't say, it says what to do, but not how to do. So we tell them, put it in your SOP. But if it's not a requirement, we're not able to do that, right?
Well, but it's no different than, you have to have a quality policy. Okay? You have to encourage ethical behavior. Okay. Now what things are you going to put into place? Right? The how is up to you.
Right. Isn't quality policy supposed to be reviewed
Yep.
at the management review? Or is it internally dictated?
We don't put when or where you have to do it. It just says it has to be reviewed on a periodic basis, right?
Right. Periodic basis.
So, you can put it in management review. You can put it separate for management review. It's up to you. It may make sense in many cases to put it in management review because you already have management review on a periodic basis.
Okay.
Anyway.
Another question I have is section 10.1, you said is continuous improvement. So preventive action is going to be under that.
So there is, again, the 2015 edition did not have a section on preventive action, and the next edition will not have a section specifically named preventive action, right? It will just be continual improvement and corrective action.
Okay.
And it is intentionally, I can't tell you how many discussions we've had on this. It is continual, not continuous.
Yeah.
Okay. Continuous means without breaking. Continual means that it never stops. Right. When I give that training and that kind of stuff, when I talk about the differences, continuous is like a ramp, right? It moves upward and it's without breaking. Continual is like a set of stairs, right? I go flat for a little while and then I step up, and I go flat for a little while and I step up. That's continual improvement. Okay.
Right. Thanks for all the questions. It's time. So quick update from today's meeting. I have sent the RU attendance emails to everyone. If you haven't received that email, please let me know. You can either tell me right now or via email, and I can try to send it again. I rely on the email that you used during your registration. So if it was erroneous for some reason, we've figured out that hyphens don't necessarily get saved properly. So if your email has a hyphen in it, it may be a problem. Yeah, please reach out to me and I can send that over. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. If you guys do have questions, my email is on here. My LinkedIn is on here for our company. If you go to QRxPartners.com, my picture is there. You can click on my picture and get my direct email from there. So if you have any questions, want to reconnect, you can find me on LinkedIn or you can find me on our company website. So thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thanks everyone for attending. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you.